A lot of people look at our gardens and they don't see very many weeds, and they think that we must be weeding all the time. Well, it just isn't true.
An old-timer once told me that his secret for keeping a garden weed-free was to speak to the weeds and tell them to grow somewhere else. Well, Barbara and I don't claim to speak weed, but we do have a number of simple and non-chemical techniques for keeping our garden weed-free. I'm Eliot Coleman.
And I'm Barbara Damrosch. And if you'll stay with us for the next half hour, we'll give you some tips on keeping weeds out of your garden.
On Gardening Naturally. If I have my choice of ways to weed the garden, this is the way I prefer, sitting out on a bench, reading a book. Actually, it was because of this particular book, which is called 10 Acres Enough by Edmund Morris, published way back in 1864, that I figured out how to beat weeds. Morris writes that he came resolutely to the conclusion there must be a limit to weeds. And if we could induce all of the seeds contained in the soil to germinate and then destroy the plants before they matured a new crop of seeds, we should ever afterwards be excused from such constant labor as we had gone through. Well, that really makes a lot of sense. If you can keep weeds from going to seed, there won't be any new seeds in the garden. And there's a wonderful old saying, 1 year's seeding means 7 years weeding. And this is a very good example. This is not a bouquet, this is 7 years' work. Every one of these little stems sticking out that used to be a flower is now a seed pod filled with seeds. And this is just one plant. I don't think I could count the number of seeds that are contained in here. If I let this go to seed in the garden, I have that many more weed seeds for the future. But if I take Edmund Morris's advice and keep weeds from going to seed and get rid of the ones that are there, pretty soon there won't be any more weed seeds left. Honest.
I find that I don't have to do very much weeding in this perennial garden. It's the second year I've had it here, and the plants have become great big clumps so that you can't even see very much bare soil where weeds can get a start. I've even put in a few annuals, like these bachelor's buttons, and in another few weeks you'll hardly see any bare ground at all. In the meantime, and you got a few grass blades and chickweed that are coming in there. But there's always going to be occasions where I have to get down on my hands and knees and hand pull a few obstinate characters. Well, I can see right away that there's a couple of bad actors in this particular patch of the garden. Look how big this vetch vine has gotten. I want to yank that out by its roots if I can. In a flower garden, the bare areas are easy to keep track of. You can really see the weeds. It's the ones that come in the clumps of plants. Look at this tall grass. My mother used to tell me that weeds have the ability to camouflage themselves by growing next to a plant that they look like. But I'm starting to believe it. Look how closely this resembles the spent foliage of the grape hyacinth that's sitting right next to it. I'm going to grasp this firmly and pull it out so I get all of the root, so no more will grow. Now, I think the best tool for hand weeding is the hand. I can get most things out that way. But every now and then, I need to take something like a trowel and jab it into the ground to really loosen the root system to make sure I get it. A lot of people like a little claw weeder like this. You can loosen a lot of weeds at once with that. Sometimes if I have a really stubborn big weed, like a big clump of grass, I might use something like this digging fork to pry it out. But here's a case where I know I'm going to need a hand tool. Look at the dandelion that's come up right in the middle of that salvia. I'm going to take my dandelion digger and see if I can get it down into the middle here and get the whole dandelion root. I may not be able to do it, but if I don't, it's not the end of the world. No, I only got part of it. But don't despair, because sooner or later, any plant that's cut repeatedly will give up and stop growing. Now, it looks like things are doing pretty well over here. I don't see any weeds. I know, this is a weed. It's hawkweed, and it just appeared in the middle of this clump of asters. But it looks so beautiful blooming here with these blue salvias and the white artemisias that I thought I'd at least leave it until it stops blooming, then I'll dig it out.
The first step in weed control is preparing the garden right, and that means getting rid of the perennials and the invasive weeds. Now, a perennial like this dandelion, if you take care of it once and well, it's done with. Just stick in a digging tool like this double-bladed hand fork, well down in there, pry underneath to make sure you break off the root and get enough of the root, and that's done with. You won't have to worry about that again. It's the invasive weeds, like these here, that are actually coming from main plants back outside the garden that can continually creep in and give you problems. And so once a year, I'll go along with the spade around the edge of this garden to try and take care of them. This looks innocent, but if you dig down under it, you'll see that it has a long white stem that takes it all the way back to where it's attached to its mother plant. No matter how many times you came through here with a hoe and cut the head off of this weed, you'd never get it to stop growing because it can continue to get food back from where it came from. So these ones, you have to get out by digging and actually prying out them and the mother plants like that, knocking the soil off of them, throwing them in the weed bucket and into the compost heap, and get them out of there before you begin. If that's done, you've handled those problems, and then you can go on to the easier job of getting rid of the annual weeds.
This buttercup came up behind some threadleaf coreopsis, and it looks so pretty in a spot where there isn't any other color that I just left it be. I'll pull it out a little bit later. Another thing I do a lot in this particular garden is let things go to seed. Last year I had a lot of Johnny jump-ups and some tufted pansies, and they're just popping up all over the place, all by themselves. I even left this one that crept into the walkway because it looks so pretty. Another plant I had last year was some alyssum, and it's self-sown all along this border in a really nice way, so I'm leaving that where it looks good. We had some Shirley poppies here. They're not blooming yet, but I noticed that they're coming up all over the place, and they're going to have a fine show without my even having to plant them. But sometimes they seed themselves in a place I don't want them, right in the middle of this perennial geranium, for example. So I'm just going to pull out the ones that really aren't in the right place. This one can come out, but the rest are fine for now. Well, you're probably thinking by now that I'm awfully tolerant about weeds in the garden. Well, now you're really going to think I'm eccentric, because some of these weeds I'm going to pick for dinner. I just noticed that there's some lamb's quarters, a very common weed around here, but they're actually very good to eat. You can make them cooked like cream spinach, and when they're young and tender like this, you can just chop them up and put them in a salad. We might even have those for dinner. Here's another weed, purslane. It's just starting to come in now. I'm going to have to clean that off when I get them into the kitchen, but they have little succulent leaves that have a nice crunch to them. In cleaner soil, I'll even snack on them sometimes when I'm weeding in the garden. Anyway, those can go into the salad too and give it a little bit of crunch.
I'm using this 3-tined cultivator to mix this compost shallowly into the surface of this bed. Now, many people would use a tool like this for weeding, thinking that these hooks would be great for ripping out weeds. They might be, but the problem is that at the same time, if you use it like that, you'll also rip the roots of the crop you're trying to cultivate next to, and that isn't good for it. The best use for this tool is as a mixer, and it does that beautifully, mixing compost just into the surface of the soil. Not deeply, because you remember with weeds, first you want to get rid of the weeds that are in the surface of your soil, and that's what we're doing with shallow cultivation. You don't want to let new weeds go to seed, so if you see any, you make sure they never go to seed. But third, you don't want to bring up new seeds from below by turning the soil over. And that's why when I put in compost for the next crop, I just do it shallowly with this tool, just mixing it into that same surface soil. That's where it does best. That's where you'll get the best results from it. Now, if I did have some soil compaction, I might want to do something about it with a fork. I'm not going to turn over the soil, though. I'm just going to press the fork in and lean back on it, just to lift and break up that compaction. Just push in lean back. And then I've taken care of the compaction. When I spread more compost on top, it makes it even easier to mix it in. Remember, tools are a system. Shallow cultivation, shallow mixing, and you can end your weed problems forever.
Now, with this little garden, I practically solved all my weed problems by applying a shredded bark mulch. This mulch does triple duty in this garden. It helps to suppress weeds. It keeps moisture in, which is particularly important in this garden because it's under a roof overhang and it doesn't get much water. And it also will add nutrients to the soil. As I garden year by year, I'll be digging some of it in, and it'll add organic matter. The reason I didn't use this mulch on the other garden we just visited is that I wanted to encourage some of those plants to self-sow, and that's hard to achieve if you have a thick mulch. I don't apply this mulch too close to the perennial clumps because it can cause them to rot in the winter and spring when the soil is moist. So I kind of put it in between, maybe 2 inches deep. I got this delivered in bulk from a sawmill, an excellent place to get shredded bark. Sometimes it comes awfully coarse like this. You can put that on your shrub plantings or just take out the big pieces. You could also buy it in bags sometimes, and you can get it as fine as this here. It won't last quite as long, but you can till it in each year and start over, especially if you've got a planting that's just annuals. Now, another popular mulch with flower gardeners is buckwheat hulls, which is very attractive, really. Gives a nice finished look to a flower bed. The one drawback with buckwheat hulls is they blow away easily. I think if I put it here, they'd blow down onto my path all the time. But there's some situations where this fills the bill perfectly. A lot of people worry about weeds in their lawns, and it's a valid worry, because if half of your lawn were broadleaf weeds, then in the wintertime, that half would not be green. So you want the majority of it to be green grass. On the other hand, there are an awful lot of little weeds that can creep into your lawn that are awfully pretty when they're blooming if you let your grass grow a little taller than usual. I went down the road and I put together a little collection of low, creeping, flowering weeds that are in bloom right now that I would not at all mind having in my lawn. This one is ground ivy. This is white clover, which is probably in my lawn mix anyway. Here's some wild strawberries, which have little white flowers. Some of them are even producing fruits right now. This is bluets. You'll often see little tufts of those in lawns, and they're absolutely charming. This is hawkweed. This is one of my favorites. Comes in yellow and in orange. Here's some chamomile, and here's some blue-eyed grass. Isn't that pretty? Really charming. So I think maybe I'll just go over to a more remote part of the lawn, maybe try to introduce some of these. Eliot would be appalled at the idea, but Eliot's not here. He's in the vegetable garden weeding.
What makes weed control easy and pleasant is the right tool. And unfortunately, the classic old hoe is not the right tool. And that's because it has a 90-degree angle here, which forces you, when you weed with it, to chop with it, with your thumbs down the handle, like some of those little lawn statues on the windmill you've seen all day long, and your back hurts. What you want to do is have a hoe that changes that angle and makes it so you can stand upright. I took one of those old hoes to the shop years ago and started bending and playing, and this is what I came up with. First, a narrow blade that's in line with the handle, collineal, and why not? This is where I'm aiming. Next, a 70-degree angle, because with a 70-degree angle, I can stand upright, my back's straight, and instead of chopping, just draw this through the surface of the soil, which is just what the 70-degree angle does. It aligns it perfectly for that. That means I'm going very shallowly with it, not harming any plant roots, and I'm getting rid of little weeds before they even know they're a weed. I tell people I never weed, I only cultivate. And cultivating is the shallow stirring of the soil before weeds appear. That's what keeps the garden weed-free. Every time little weeds germinate and I get rid of them, I'm getting rid of that many more weed seeds in the topsoil. If I get rid of them in the top inch, inch and a half, 2 inches, by doing this every so often, there are no more. Weeds don't come up from below that. I now have what Edmund Morris was talking about. I have weeds beaten. Now, if I do have larger weeds to deal with, I'll use something like this stirrupo. It swings back and forth, and it works well in a path like this. The path is compacted, and it's hard to get things out that I can come along it just moving backwards like this and getting rid of the hard, well-rooted weeds very easily. Why do I move backwards? So I don't leave footprints there, which would press those weeds back into the soil and help them germinate again. Now, the best time to weed, of course, is not before a rain, but after. You want the sun to dry them out. This hoe is also perfect for little rows of seedlings. I've driven a tractor a lot of my life, and this is just like that. I'm coming along with this blade just below the surface of the soil. I can do whole rows very quickly, right to within a ½ inch of the stems of those plants. You can't ask for better accuracy and better weed control than that. Shallow, not letting weeds barely get up before you get rid of them, always getting rid of them. This is a pleasure to do. Such a pleasure. Notice the position I'm in. This is actually a ballroom dancing position. This is the way this hoe is held comfortably. So, put a Strauss waltz on the stereo, open the window, and go out to your garden in the evening and have fun dancing with your hoe.
May I cut in?
Of course.
I don't think it's a waltz. I think this is a hoe down we're doing. But anyway, isn't this my hoe, Eliot? Wasn't mine the one with a little nick on it?
Oh, the best way you can tell whose hoe it is by the height of it. The best height for a hoe is right about to the tip of the nose of the user. Your hoe would be much shorter, and it's back at the house.
Well, I'm going to take this hoe for now.
Dull as a hoe is an old expression, almost as if one were supposed to go out and bludgeon the weeds to death with a club. Well, even this old hoe would benefit from having a sharp edge. And our draw hoes and our stirrup hoes especially work well if that edge there is just as sharp as you can get it. The way to do that is to use a file. In fact, I carry a file in my back pocket. And I'll take the stirrup hoe, hold it up like this, and just run the file across there, paying attention to the bevel, making sure you maintain it, and get a sharp chisel edge on there. You're just sharpening it from one side, but I want it as sharp as I can get it. Now, because of the way this swings back and forth in the soil, sharpening it from this direction works fine. But with the draw hoe, you want to sharpen it from the other side, because you want to make sure that with the draw hoe, the sharp edge of the chisel blade is on the bottom next to the soil. So to sharpen this one, I'll hold it right side up and run the file across it like that. So the edge, the very sharp edge, is right there to go right beneath the soil and cut off the roots of all those little tiny weeds. The tool of choice is a metal file. This is called a mill bastard file. The garden models, instead of coming to a point, are rounded like this and are a little easier if you carry it in your back pocket, as I do. The other file you can use is even a folded one, like this one, that is coated with small pieces of diamond and really does a fine sharpening job to get that edge just as sharp and crisp as you'd want it. The sharper that is, the less work for you as a gardener, and you can get out there and really take care of the weeds. If you've kept up with your cultivating to this point, by this stage you ought to have weeds pretty much under control. And now's the time to actually plant some weeds. It's a process known as undersowing. I'm going to plant underneath this corn a legume in order to benefit the soil for next year. Why won't that bother the corn like a weed? Well, let me tell you about it. Weed studies have shown that weeds are really only major competition for crops during the first 4 to 5 weeks after they're planted, up to about a foot tall like this corn. And if you put in a clover or something underneath them at that point, the corn is tall enough and big enough so it will continue to grow with no competition, and it isn't quite so big as to totally shade out the legume you're putting in underneath it. In other words, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can grow your garden crop and grow next year's fertility in the understory. Undersowing, it's a wonderful idea. So I'm going to use almost any legume I want. I could use red clover, which is a hardy clover up here, if I wanted there to be lots of residue here next spring. But actually what I want is to plant a very early crop here next spring. I think it's going to be spinach, and I would just soon not have too much residue. So instead of a hardy clover, I'm going to plant a less hardy southern clover, maybe lespedeza, maybe crimson clover, maybe berseem clover, and that will grow through the rest of my summer and fall, but freeze out about Christmas time. Its residues will protect the soil, but there'll be very little for me to rake off next spring. And all you have to do this is just take the seed and scatter it lightly all over the bed and under the plants. Just lightly. You'd be surprised how much of a plant comes from a few of these little seeds. And then rake it in with a rake, just gently, just to mix those seeds in with the surface of the soil. Tamp it down to firm them in. And now you have this year's crop and next year's fertility all taken care of at once.
You know, Eliot, it's funny, but sometimes I actually like weeding. It's one of those quiet, rhythmic, meditative activities that I can sort of lose myself in and just mull over the things that are on my mind.
Well, sometimes I feel that way, but I suspect that most of the time I'd rather meditate on a beautiful, weed-free garden. And whether you achieve that by cultivating in the vegetable garden or mulching in the flower garden, the main point to remember is that a minute of prevention is worth an hour of weeding.
And nobody likes to weed. Till next time, goodbye and good gardening.
Next on TLC, get started on easy home projects that anyone can handle here on Homebodies. Then indulge your creative side with Debbie Stapley on Crafts & Company here on TLC.